When something truly awful happens, our brain kicks into high gear, trying to make sense of it all. But what if the story we tell ourselves about it is wrong? What if that story is the very thing keeping us from healing? Today, we're going to dive into how our minds process trauma and, more importantly, how we can learn to rewrite the very narratives that hold us captive. So here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at how trauma gets stuck in the first place. Then, we'll explore the surprising power of simple questions. We're going to untangle the tricky difference between blame and responsibility, introduce a super practical toolkit, and finally, see how it all comes together to rewrite the story. All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, When Trauma Gets Stuck. This is all about the stories our brains tell us. And really, it all boils down to this one big question. When we go through something that just completely shatters our view of the world, our brain scrambles to find an explanation. Any explanation, really, just to get some sense of order back. And look, this whole storytelling thing, it's totally natural. It's a survival instinct. The problem is, right after a traumatic event, things are chaotic. And the story we come up with is often based on scrambled information and really intense emotions. It's like a first draft, written in the middle of a crisis. And this is where we get to the absolute heart of the matter. Therapists have a name for these flawed beliefs: stuck points. Now, a stuck point isn't just a negative thought. It's this deeply rooted conviction that actually stops you from getting better. It's things like, it was all my fault, or that classic hindsight bias, I should have known this was going to happen. These beliefs literally become the glasses we see the world through. So how in the world do you challenge a belief that feels so completely true? Well, that brings us to our second section, the power of questions, using a technique called Socratic dialogue. The whole idea here is that a therapist isn't there to tell you you're wrong. Nope. Instead, they act more like a guide, asking these gentle, clarifying questions. The entire goal is to help you hold your own belief up to the light, look at it from every angle, and let you be the one to find where it doesn't quite add up. Okay, let's look at a real-world example. Here we have a powerful stuck point from a client who's been through a sexual assault. It's absolute, it's definite, and it's just crushing. It is all my fault. Now notice what the therapist does here. They don't argue, they don't push back, right? They just sort of accept the premise for a second and then gently poke at the logic. This question immediately starts to crack open that black and white, all my fault thinking. It introduces the idea that maybe, just maybe, fault isn't a 100 to 0 kind of thing. And then they take it a step further. The therapist simply reflects the facts of what happened, facts the client has already told them right back to them. They're not adding anything new, they're just laying out the evidence and asking, hey, does this evidence actually line up with your conclusion? And through that gentle questioning, boom, there it is, the breakthrough. The client arrives at their own new conclusion, one that's based on the actual evidence, not just on the feeling of shame. And this new thought, it's so much more accurate, and it's a huge step toward healing. Now, this whole process often bumps up against a huge hurdle. We get blame and responsibility all tangled up. So for our third section, let's focus on untangling these really tough feelings. To help with this, therapists often use a tool that looks something like this handout. The whole point is to take that big, tangled knot of awful feelings, guilt, regret, sadness, and just gently pull on the different threads. It helps you ask, okay, honestly, what was my actual role in what happened? Okay, so let's break this down, because this is huge. If something was truly unforeseeable, something you had no way of predicting, the feeling that fits is grief or sadness. Now, if you were responsible, meaning you played a part but you never intended for the bad outcome, like in an accident, the feeling that fits is regret. The key takeaway here, fault or blame, that's reserved only for when you actually intended for the bad thing to happen. For so many people, seeing this distinction is a total game changer. Okay, so the dialogue is great, these frameworks are helpful, but how do you actually use this stuff day to day? That's where this next tool comes in. Think of it as a toolkit for thoughts. It's called the Exploring Questions Worksheet. This is basically Socratic dialogue that you can do for yourself. It's a structured way to take one of those painful stuck points and systematically question it, piece by piece, just like we saw the therapist do in that earlier example. It really empowers you to become your own guide. And check this out. Here are two different examples of it being used. The one on the left is about a childhood sexual assault. The one on the right is about a fatal car accident. But look at the last question on both. In what ways is your stuck point based on feelings rather than facts? It's fascinating, right? They both basically say the same thing. Because I felt guilty and shameful, I thought it must be my fault. This tool helps you see that difference so clearly. And all of this work, the questioning, the untangling, the worksheets, it all leads to this final, incredibly powerful step, rewriting the narrative. This is about going from feeling like a monster to seeing yourself as a whole person again. Let's look at another really profound stuck point. This one from a combat vet. He has basically defined his entire being by this traumatic action. And again, what's the therapist's first move? Not to argue. Just a simple question. What do you mean by monster? And this right here, this is the turning point. The therapist zeroes in on the language. Are you a killer versus someone who has killed? That's a subtle distinction, but it's everything. A killer is a noun. It's who you are. Someone who has killed describes a verb. It's something you did. It separates the person from the action. So the therapist paints a picture, kind of like what you see here. Imagine your life as a pie chart. Yeah, that slice for someone who has killed, it's there, it's real. But look at all the other slices. Father, husband, worker, friend. The trauma is a part of the story, but it's not the whole story, not even close. And that's really the ultimate goal here. It's not about magic. It's not about pretending the bad thing didn't happen. It's about integrating it into your life story in a way that it no longer gets to define your entire existence. You're putting it in its proper place. And just look at the difference. The shift it's incredible. He goes from this absolute statement, I am a monster, to something far more nuanced, less despicable. He moves from feeling only shame to realizing he might even feel proud of his actions in that context because he was protecting his men. The story has been rewritten. You know, when you see this process in action, it's so powerful. And it really makes you think, beyond these major traumas, what other stories, big or small, have we told ourselves that might be based more on our feelings than on the facts? What stories could we all learn to rewrite?